during Roman civilization, women were regarded as slaves. The Greeks considered her as a commodity to be bought and sold. In India, the Hindus, up to recently, they've had this custom where when a husband dies, the woman will have to die with her husband in the fire and burn together, being cremated with her husband. In pre-Islamic state of Arabia, women were regarded as the very cause of the grief to the society. Therefore, little girls were buried alive, and that's in the Holy Quran. In France, in 587 Christian era, this was just about the time when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was after he was born, that in France there was a meeting held to study the status of women and to determine whether a woman could truly be considered as a human being or not. Henry VIII in England forbade the reading of the Bible by women, and throughout the Middle Ages the Catholic Church treated women as second-class citizens. The universities of Cambridge and Oxford did not give male and female students the same right until 1964. So that's just about 40 years ago, when there were equal rights in the most renowned universities in this country. Before 1850, women were not counted as citizens in England, and English women had no personal rights until 1882. So we're just talking about just over a century that they got their rights. In the US, women couldn't make wills, they couldn't vote, they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't own a property, they had no equality in education. Even now, women aren't being paid the same as men. In the early 1900s, women and men in the same company, women were getting 25% of the pay that men were receiving in the same country for the same job, for the same hours. Now it's moved up to about 75%, but there still is a struggle in the world for women getting their rights. 1972 in the United States of America, the states passed the law for equality of women in jobs. Just in 1972, that's about 30 years ago that this happened. Now in Islam there's been a total different attitude towards women and their rights, and we've got to make sure that when we come across non-Muslims picking on Islamic issues, they say, well, Muslim men are the ones who keep their women at home, they are the ones who beat their wives according to the Quran. We'll come to that later on. Muslim men are the ones who deprive their women of education and so on. When they say this to us, before we become defensive and give our answers from the Quran, from the Sunnah, the first thing we should do is point out all of these things. The first thing we should do is say, well, talk about your own society, where, for instance, in America, up till today, there's never been a woman who's been a president. Up till today. In England, there's only one example of that in the government, Margaret Thatcher, and even Queen Elizabeth I, when she came to reign, it was something which they had to abandon religion to get a woman in position and in power. In our Islamic history, we've always had women being judges in courts. We've had in our history women being educationists. So the Prophet ﷺ now was changing the entire structure of the whole peninsula of Arabia. He was changing the whole structure, because these men used to beat their women in the Arabian the civilization before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just as the Europeans used to do it, just as the Americans used to do it. There was no law for women before our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came. There was hardly any law found in any country before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came. They used to beat their women, they used to lash them with whips, they used to sometimes, if they wanted to, they would marry up to 10 women at a time. There's one Sahabi who had 10 women. When the ayahs came down to reduce it to 4, and the Prophet ﷺ even then he stressed on equality with women, and that Sahabi had to divorce 6 of them and leave 4 for his wives. But you can see to what extent these men went to, how they treated women. Women had no say in any position of authority. They could not come to the meetings where men held their meetings, how to run the society. This was this is Arabia before the advent of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.